That day, the hospital was sterile white, like any other, but to me, it felt colder than a Montana winter morning. I stood there, less than 3 steps from her hospital bed, but I felt worlds away. Amber was lying there, cradling the baby. Her face held a glow I once knew, a new mother's joy, or at least, the conviction that everything had fallen perfectly into place, just as she'd planned. The baby was swaddled in a pale pink blanket, tiny like a kitten, skin rosy, a tuft of dark hair on its head. Everyone else looked at the child like a little angel sent from heaven. My mother, Susan, stood to Amber's left, quiet, but her eyes kept flicking towards me, searching, judging. My mother-in-law, Marjorie, stood to the right, her hand resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder, her face etched with emotion, almost brimming with tears. I didn't move, didn't step closer, didn't offer a single word of congratulations. It wasn't because I didn't know what it meant to be a father. It was because I wasn't sure if I was this child's father. The steady beep of the heart monitor was a constant reminder that I was still breathing, even though my chest felt utterly hollow. My mother glanced at me again, longer this time. She didn't speak, but I knew what she was thinking. Her son, Ethan Blake. Why was he standing there like a statue at the very moment the family was supposed to be celebrating a new arrival? The door swung open, and a nurse walked in, clipboard in hand, wearing a professional smile. "Mr. Blake," she said, "I need you to sign the birth certificate." Her words dropped into the charged air like a rock tossed into a perfectly still lake. I turned to look at her, my expression calm, my voice low, not sharp, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "We'll fill out that paperwork after a DNA test confirms I'm the father." The way Amber's head snapped up, I'll never forget it. Her eyes flew wide. Her mouth fell slightly open as if she couldn't believe what she just heard. The baby startled slightly, stirring in her arms. Marjorie gasped, her hand flying to her chest, and my mother stood frozen, her face unreadable, but her shoulders tensed. How dare you say that now?" Amber hissed through clenched teeth, her voice choked but sharp enough to cut. I looked directly into her eyes.
No flinching, no anger.
"I'm not saying maybe. I'm saying, I know you cheated. And now, I need to know if this child is mine." It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Marjorie stepped forward, her voice low but urgent. "Ethan, this isn't the time. Amber just gave birth. She's not stable. What you're saying could push her into postpartum depression. You have to think of the baby." My mother was different. She didn't try to soothe. She was angry. I heard her sharp intake of breath before her voice trembled out. "I didn't raise my son to be this cruel, Ethan." I remained still, not because I didn't feel the pressure, but because I was used to standing alone now. For the past 4 months, I'd lived silently with this suspicion, like acid eating away at me cell by cell. I hadn't said anything, hadn't lost my temper, hadn't flipped any tables. I just waited for this day. I took a deep breath, felt my hands clench unconsciously, then forced them to relax. "Amber," I said her name, my voice level. "Should I call your lover, Derek Cole, and ask him to come down here?" She flinched as if shocked by an electric current. Eyes wide, the baby stirred again. She stammered, I have nothing to do with him." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my jacket pocket. Every crease had been smoothed flat by my cold fingers, like unfolding an envelope containing the truth. "I just want to ask," I said, "why did you text him? My husband can never know about us. I don't want anything to do with you anymore." Amber's face went pale. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes reddened. Her lips trembled. I didn't give her a chance to retreat. I held up the paper, reading every word aloud. The hospital room was so quiet you could hear the smallest sound, the rustle of blankets, faint footsteps in the hallway, someone swallowing hard. Amber started to cry, not loud sobs, but deep, ragged, choked gasps. She clutched the baby tighter, as if it were her only anchor. But me, I had nothing left to hold on to. I looked around the room, for faces, for reactions, and only one thought echoed in my head. If the baby is mine, I'll do my duty. But if not, then not even my gaze will belong to it. I turned away, walked silently out of the room, leaving behind the sound of my estranged wife's weeping and a tiny life that I didn't yet have the faith to call my child. I left that delivery room feeling like someone had just ripped the oxygen tube from my chest. No one followed. No one called out. Just the squeak of a nurse's rubber-soled shoes and the persistent smell of antiseptic hanging in the long, empty corridor. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, watching the numbers descend one by one while Amber's choked sobs still echoed in my mind. I didn't feel relief nor anger, just a gaping emptiness in my chest, cold as ice. At that moment, I had no idea what would happen next. But I knew from that instant on, I had stepped out of the role of the perfect husband, a role I'd played for nearly 10 years. I drove home under a graying afternoon sky, buildings sliding past the car window like emotionless concrete blocks. When I arrived, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car, hands on the steering wheel, head tilted back, eyes closed. I thought back to 4 months ago, the night I found the first message. It wasn't anything obvious. Just a notification lighting up Amber's phone screen as she stepped into the bathroom. I hadn't meant to look. I'd never checked my wife's phone, never thought I needed to. But that night, I don't know what made me do it. A text from an unknown number, just 4 words, "Call me. It's urgent." I opened it, and then a whole conversation thread appeared, under a name I'd never heard, Derek C. Secretive messages, brief, suggestive meetups. And finally, the line that made my heart seize. "You're pregnant? Is it mine?" I hadn't yelled, hadn't smashed the phone. I just quietly placed it back on the table, exactly where it had been, then walked out onto the balcony, where the cold night air wrapped around my neck like a cruel whisper. I didn't sleep that night, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed the truth, and I wouldn't let anger destroy my plan to get it. I started being silent, not because I didn't know, but because I needed time to prepare. I hired a private investigator. He was discreet, left no trace. He tailed Derek, found his address, his workplace, even his lunch routine. Soon enough, I knew they were still seeing each other. Not openly, but enough to understand the so-called moment of weakness was just a gentler term for an ongoing betrayal. I printed the messages,
Zavit audio recordings.
installed keylogging software on Amber's laptop without her knowing, and I kept all of it until the baby was born, because if I'd confronted her earlier, it would have dissolved into he said, she said. She would deny it. Her family would protect her, and I would look like the paranoid husband. But now, everything was ready. A day after leaving the hospital, I got word. Amber and the baby had gone to her mother's house to rest. I didn't object. I even asked my own mother, Susan, to take some things over for them, to create the impression that I was still confused, still weak-willed. In reality, I was just waiting for the right moment. 3 days later, I went to Marjorie's house. A neatly trimmed lawn, a white picket fence, pots of blooming yellow chrysanthemums by the door. It all projected a sense of artificial calm, like a shiny veneer hiding the rot underneath. I knocked. Marjorie opened the door, her eyes wary but maintaining a polite facade. "Ethan," she said. "Come in." I stepped inside. Amber was sitting on the sofa holding the baby, Noah. Her eyes were shadowed, but the tears were gone. She looked at me, her mouth trembling slightly. You came." I didn't answer. I just placed a file folder on the coffee table, then sat down opposite them. "We need to talk," I said, my voice as steady as a clock's tick. Marjorie looked at me, then glanced at Amber. "If this is about the hospital, I think." I held up a hand, stopping her. "I kept quiet for 4 months. Not because I didn't know, but because I needed to be sure." Amber hugged the baby tighter. I saw it, the defensiveness. She knew what was coming. I opened the folder, pulled out the first document, the printed text messages. "I read everything you texted Derek, from the beginning to when you found out you were pregnant. You lied to him, told him the baby wasn't his. But you told me nothing. Why is that, Amber?" She shook her head, lips moving silently. "I don't know what you're talking about." I didn't let her finish. I pulled out the audio recording, the call between Amber and Derek. Her voice, unmistakable, filled the room. "We have to stop seeing each other. Ethan suspects something," and Derek's voice replying, "Then tell him the truth. He deserves that." Amber's voice, smaller, like a sigh, "No. If he finds out, it's over." The room seemed to freeze. I looked up and saw my mother Susan had just walked in, a gift bag for the baby in her hand. She looked at me, then at Amber, then at the file on the table. "Ethan, what's going on?" I met my mother's gaze, my voice soft but clear. "I'm showing everyone why I didn't sign the birth certificate." Marjorie sank back into the chair, her face white. Amber cried. But this time, I felt nothing. No anger, no pain. Just finality. I stood up, slowly gathering the file, my eyes sweeping around the room. This place that was once supposed to be family. "I've waited long enough for this day. From this moment on, I have no ties to you, Amber." I turned to leave, but stopped with my hand on the doorknob. "And if any of you try to force me to be this child's father, remember this. I have proof, and I won't hesitate to use it." No one answered. Only the sound of Noah's faint cry in the arms of his broken mother. I walked out, letting the door close behind me, like a final punctuation mark written with the silence of 4 months of waiting. I don't know how long I drove after leaving Marjorie's house. The sky was overcast that day, heavy clouds hanging over the rooftops, pressing down on my mind with a vague weight. It felt like someone had just ripped down the stage curtain, leaving me standing alone amidst the wreckage I used to call my family life. But the strangest thing was that I didn't feel the pain I'd expected. Maybe because the pain had run dry long ago, starting that night I found the first message. The night I stood on my balcony, looking down at the quiet street, holding a cold cup of coffee, my heart just as cold. I didn't go straight home that day. I went directly to the bank. I met with my account manager, a man in his 50s, balding, with a slow, polite way of speaking that bordered on infuriating. I sat down, looked him straight in the eye, and said without a hint of hesitation, "I want to separate our accounts today. All joint assets. Please freeze them until there's a court order for division." He blinked, momentarily confused, but then nodded, flipping through the paperwork. I signed, provided fingerprints, and within half an hour, everything that had ever been jointly held between Amber and me, from bank accounts to investments, was frozen. Leaving the bank, I called my lawyer Ron, an old friend, and someone I knew wouldn't be easily swayed by tearful dramatics. I met Ron at his private office, a small, tidy room on the 3rd floor of an old building on Clay Street. Pale beige wallpaper, a dark wood desk, and behind him, shelves crammed with thick files categorized with red marker. "Which grounds for divorce?" Ron asked, opening a fresh legal pad, pen poised. "Adultery," I replied curtly. He looked up at me, didn't ask further questions. He knew my nature. I didn't say things I wasn't sure about. But Ron still did his due diligence. He told me I needed concrete, legally admissible evidence. I nodded and pulled everything from my briefcase. Printouts of texts, audio recordings, photos, call logs. "Enough?" I asked. Ron took them, flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning quickly. "Enough," he replied. "More than enough." We agreed to file within the week. I didn't want to delay. What needed to end should end properly at the right time. No more clinging, no more concessions, and especially no more confusing kindness with weakness. When I got home, I walked through the familiar old wooden door I'd opened and closed thousands of times. Everything inside was still in its place. My slippers crooked under the armchair, the wedding photo hanging on the wall opposite the window, sticky notes on the fridge, as if nothing had changed. But in reality, everything had changed long ago. I walked over to the photo frame, lifted it off the hook, and quietly placed it face down in a drawer. No need to smash it, no need to throw it away. Just hide it from view, like tidying up parts of a life that no longer held value. I went into the bedroom. Amber's side of the closet was still full. I took out suitcases, folded each item of clothing. Didn't rip, didn't discard, just folded neatly, as if seeing off a guest who had overstayed their welcome. I closed the suitcases, placed them by the door. Then, I texted my mother-in-law, Amber's things are packed. I'll arrange for them to be delivered. She doesn't need to come back here." Not long after, my phone rang. It was my mother. I sighed before answering. Her voice was firm but quieter than usual. "Do you really want to push things this far, Ethan?" I paused for a few seconds, then said slowly, "Mom, I stayed silent for 4 months. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted her to have a peaceful pregnancy." Silence on the other end. A long silence. Finally, she asked, "So what if the baby is yours?" I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. "If he's mine, I'll fulfill my duties as a father. But that doesn't mean I have to continue being the husband of someone who betrayed me." Her voice got smaller. "You don't want to think about forgiveness?" I let out a dry laugh. Not bitter. Just the laugh of someone hearing a question whose answer they already knew. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Mom. And forgiveness doesn't mean you have to keep living with the person who stabbed you in the back. My mother didn't say anything else. Just a very soft sigh, like wind slipping through a crack in the door on a winter night. When the call ended, I leaned against the living room wall, staring at the ceiling. Where a hook for Christmas lights used to be, only a faint mark remained, like an old scar. Not painful, but still a reminder of something that once existed. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed an email to Ron. "Let's file this week." Then I shut down the computer, turned off the lights, and walked towards the empty side of the bed. Outside, it started to rain. Steady drops tapped rhythmically on the roof, like the breathing of a sleeping city. And me, I was awake, but at least, for the first time in months, I wasn't awake with doubt. I was awake with clarity, and sometimes clarity is the first step toward living again. The courtroom that morning was uncomfortably bright. Fluorescent lights glared down on the cold stone floor, reflecting the shadows of people sitting in long rows, silent like attendees at a ritual no one truly wanted to be part of. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped, back straight, eyes fixed ahead. Across the room, Amber sat in a pale gray dress, her face lightly made up, trying to look tired but resilient. She sat close to her mother, Marjorie, who gripped her daughter's hand tightly, as if afraid she might dissolve if she let go. From where I sat, I could see Amber was prepared to put on a performance. Ron, my lawyer, stood up, adjusted his tie, then leaned towards me, whispering, "Just stay calm. Don't interject. Let me handle this." I nodded. I had waited for this day, not for revenge, but to prove that truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be spoken at the right time. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s, silver hair pinned up, thin-rimmed glasses, eyes that seemed to see right through you. She struck the gavel once, a sharp crack that sliced through the heavy air. "We shall begin," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, yet commanding respect. The hearing started with Amber's testimony. She stood, her voice trembling, whether real or rehearsed, I couldn't tell, and began talking about prolonged loneliness, about how I was frequently absent due to work, and the feeling of being alone in the marriage. She spoke without pause, occasionally stopping to dab her eyes with a white handkerchief. Each tear seemed carefully calculated. It was just a mistake," she said, her voice choked. "I never meant to break up our family. I was just weak. Just that one time. I didn't flinch, didn't react. I'd heard this narrative in my head dozens of times. Same old story, same old script. The only difference this time was that there would be a rebuttal." Ron stood up. He walked slowly towards the center of the room, his voice calm, as if starting a gentle lecture. "Your Honor," he began, "the defendant has told a story, one that sounds plausible, but is, in fact, a half-truth. And as we all know, a half-truth can sometimes be more dangerous than an outright lie." Ron turned towards Amber. "You say you were weak, just once. But according to the records we've gathered, you maintained contact with that man, Derek Cole, for months after discovering you were pregnant. So, was that a single moment of weakness, or a calculated pattern of deception?" Amber opened her mouth, seemed about to say something, but Ron held up a hand. "I haven't asked a question yet," he said, his voice quiet but firm enough to silence the room. He turned back to the judge, his tone more serious. "We have text messages, audio recordings, email copies. The defendant not only hid the affair from her husband but actively obstructed his access to the truth about the child she carried. That is no longer weakness. That is manipulation." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised her hand. "Order." Ron walked to the evidence table, picked up a stack of papers. "Here are text messages between the defendant and Derek Cole, spanning from the second month of pregnancy until the final month. There's a passage here. I quote, 'I told him it's his baby. Don't do anything stupid.'" The room grew colder. I saw Amber stiffen. Ron didn't stop. "We don't deny that marriages face difficult periods. But instead of communication, the defendant chose betrayal. Instead of taking responsibility, she constructed a narrative shielded by tears. And when discovered, she still attempted to turn the situation around by blaming the betrayed husband." Amber cried out, "I'm not blaming him." Ron turned back, his eyes locked on hers. "Then tell the truth. Why did you cheat?" Amber bit her lip, her voice cracking. I felt empty. I needed someone to pay attention to me. Derek was there. He listened." Ron cut her off. "He listened, and then he slept with you. Are you sure that was attention?" Amber broke down. She wept. No more controlled tears. This was real sobbing. I just wanted to feel desired again." Her cries fell into the thick silence of the courtroom. I sat there, still watching her, but my heart felt nothing. No ripples. The judge tapped her gavel lightly. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," she announced, then left the bench. I stood up, walked out. The air in the hallway was easier to breathe. I leaned against the wall, took a long breath, and saw my mother Susan, waiting there. She looked at me, then shook her head slowly. "I can't defend her anymore," she said softly. "But the baby, that's still what worries me most," I replied, my voice even. "If he's mine, Mom, you don't need to worry." She nodded, then sighed unexpectedly. "Marjorie said something strange before the hearing." I looked at her. "What?" "I don't remember exactly, but she said something like, 'Just stay calm. I'll take care of the rest.'" I frowned, but then shook my head. Probably just a mother supporting her daughter, but a part of me wasn't entirely convinced. The hearing resumed shortly after. Procedures were followed. Evidence was admitted. The final divorce hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Enough time for the court to verify the DNA results. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I didn't feel relief, but I felt clarity. No more pretense, no more cover-ups. Amber, the woman I'd shared my life with, had cried before the court today. But tears couldn't change the truth. I wasn't sure what exhausted me more, the court hearing itself or suppressing everything inside for the past few months. When I left the courthouse that afternoon, the sun was still out, but my heart felt like it was carrying the weight of a perpetually overcast sky. The city hummed along as usual, traffic jammed, people hurried, and I felt like an outsider, belonging nowhere. I went home, opened the door, then closed it behind me. The silence was so profound I could hear the faint buzz of a fluorescent bulb flickering overhead. I walked into the kitchen, opened a cabinet, reached for the coffee. Not because I needed to stay awake. Just, I needed a reason to do something, even if it was just waiting for water to boil. Just as I poured water into the French press, the doorbell rang. The sound, so unexpected in the quiet house, startled me. I peeked through the window. It was my mother. She stood there holding a paper bag. Her expression was unreadable, not entirely sad, not entirely relieved. Just something very real, very human. I opened the door. Mom looked at me, then nodded slightly. "I brought coffee," she said softly, almost hesitantly. "The good kind. I know you don't like the hospital stuff." I stepped aside to let her in. The familiar aroma drifted from the bag, dark roast, a hint of dark chocolate, just the way I'd liked it since I was a kid. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. I placed the bag on the table, got 2 pale blue ceramic mugs, filled them with hot water and handed one to her. Mom sat down in the wooden chair opposite me. The table between us had a small scratch, a memento from when I dropped a glass tray years ago. Amber had joked then, "I hope you won't drop my trust like you dropped that tray." Huh? I had laughed. So had she. Now all of that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. Mom lifted her mug, blew gently across the surface, then looked at me over the steam. "Ethan, I'm sorry." I paused, my fingers tightening around the mug handle. "I don't know what else to say. Besides that," she continued, "I chose the wrong side. Not because I didn't believe you, but because I was afraid of the family falling apart." I didn't say anything, just stared into my coffee cup, the dark liquid still, like a pool of memory. "I got used to seeing Amber as a daughter," she said, her eyes welling up. "I know I let my emotions cloud my judgment. But today in court, when she admitted everything, I knew I was wrong." I set my mug down, the sound of ceramic tapping against wood a quiet thud. "I didn't need you to take my side, Mom," I said slowly. "I just needed you to believe me." She reached across the table, lightly touched my hand. Her palm was still warm, marked with the familiar wrinkles of a life lived. I didn't pull away. "You must have been so lonely, weren't you?" Her voice was as soft as whined through the window screens. I nodded. "For 4 months, everything was alone," I said, my eyes still fixed on the coffee. Every step, every decision. No one beside me, no one asking what I was going through. I didn't need pity, but I needed someone to understand that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't being cruel, that I was just living my truth. She squeezed my hand gently. "I understand now." We sat like that, in the quiet kitchen filled only by the ticking clock and the faint scent of coffee. No more words were needed, just the warmth of a handhold, belated, but sincere. A little later, there was a soft knock at the door. Mom got up to open it. It was Kelly. She stood there in a light khaki trench coat, hair pulled back neatly, holding a file folder. "Hi, Susan," she said gently. "Ron asked me to drop these off. A few more signatures needed for the next hearing." Mom looked back at me, then stepped aside for Kelly to enter. "Would you like a cup?" Mom asked. "No thank you, ma'am. I just stopped by with the papers." Kelly placed the folder on the table, then turned to me. "You holding up okay?" I nodded, a faint smile touching my lips. "Better, after the coffee." She smiled back softly. Then, before leaving, she paused at the door, looked back and said, "Whatever happens, you're not alone in this, Ethan. Don't forget that." The door closed behind her, and I sat there, feeling a little lighter, not because Kelly had said anything extraordinary, but because she hadn't just asked if I was okay. She just looked at me like I was someone still capable of standing. My mother sat down again, sighing quietly. "That young woman. Seems like she's seen a few things." I didn't reply, just silently picked up my coffee mug, took a small sip. The coffee was cool now, but strangely, the bitterness no longer felt cold. The afternoon passed quietly. Mom stayed a while longer, tidying up a few things in the kitchen. Before leaving, she placed her hand on my shoulder, squeezed gently. "You did the right thing. I'm proud of you." I nodded, saying nothing, because some words don't need a response. When she was gone, I stood up, went out onto the balcony, and watched the city lights begin to twinkle on. Tiny illuminated windows in distant apartments, each holding a different life, a different story. And me, I knew I was still in the middle of an unfinished chapter of my own. But at least, starting today, I wasn't writing it alone anymore. The sky was heavy with clouds that morning, fog clinging to the windshield, as opaque as my own thoughts. I sat in the parking lot after picking up the DNA test results. The envelope rested in my hand, unsealed, untapped, just casually folded, as if giving me the choice. Open it or don't. I already knew. My gut knew before my eyes saw the number. Probability of paternity, 0%. I was not Noah's father. I sat in the car a while longer, holding the paper that should have brought relief, but strangely, I felt nothing.
No joy. No sadness.
Just an icy numbness creeping up my spine. I didn't call, didn't text. I drove straight to Marjorie's house. My purpose had never felt clearer. The pale white house looked as peaceful as ever. Flower beds vibrant, fence freshly painted, as if no storm raged within its walls. I knocked, and surprisingly, Amber herself answered. Her face was pale, eyes shadowed, hair hastily tied back. But the moment she saw me, the exhaustion vanished, replaced by a flicker of light in her eyes, the light of hope. "You came," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the illusion. I knew you'd reconsider. I just told Mom you'd come back." I didn't answer, didn't smile, just gently raised a hand, stopping her as she started to move towards me. "Stop acting, Amber," I said quietly, my voice low but freezing the space between us. "I'm not here for you. I'm here to see your mother." She froze, the hope draining from her face like water through sand. Her expression crumpled, then settled into undisguised confusion. "Oh, Mom's in the living room," she said, taking a step back. "Go on in." I crossed the threshold, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my feet, the sound a reminder I was entering territory with no return path. The house was tidy as always, but I could feel the silence here. It wasn't the comfortable kind. Marjorie was sitting on the sofa, holding Noah, and next to her, more surprising than anything, was my mother. Susan looked up as I entered, her face showing no surprise, no smile, no wariness. "Just waiting." "Ethan," she said simply, "you're here." I didn't sit. I stood tall, pulled the DNA results from my pocket, and walked directly in front of Marjorie. "I want you to read this, out loud, so everyone can hear." She glanced at my mother, then took the paper with slightly trembling hands. She read it for a long moment, her eyes landing on the final line. "Probability of paternity, 0%. Her voice was soft, but sharp as a needle prick. Silence hung in the air for several seconds. Then Susan sighed softly, gently took Noah from Marjorie, placing him back in Amber's arms, and stood up. "Now no one can pressure you anymore," she said, looking at me. "We know the truth." I kept my eyes fixed on Marjorie. "I hope this is the last time you try to hide something from me." Silence. Marjorie didn't meet my gaze. She just raised a hand, gently massaged her temple, then looked towards my mother. "The boy needs a father," she said, almost to herself. "A family, not one built on a lie." I cut in, my patience gone. "Not with a child whose mother tried to use him to trap me in this marriage." Amber burst into tears, but this time I didn't even want to look at her. I turned to my mother, ready to leave. But then she said something I never expected. "Derek Cole is dead." Note: changed from Marshall to Derek for consistency with earlier mentions. I spun back around, my voice choked. "What?" Susan didn't blink. "He's dead. Car went off a bridge. An accident. Or at least, that's what the report says." I felt the air leave my lungs. I took a step back. Marjorie sat still, expressionless. "What the hell are you talking about?" I practically snarled. "You don't need the details," my mother continued. "Just know, there's no one left to come claim Noah. The risk has been eliminated." "Eliminated," I repeated, disbelieving my own ears. "Mom, you're talking about a person. A life." My mother stepped closer, placed a hand on my arm. "Listen, Ethan. I didn't do this for me. Or for Marjorie. I did it for you. For the child. Because this world, it's cruel sometimes. And sentimentality, sometimes it just leads to tragedy." I pulled back. Didn't want to hear anymore. "Do you too even hear yourselves?" Marjorie looked at me, then slowly stood up. Her face was no longer cold, but strangely serene. "My daughter did wrong," she said. "I'll never forgive her for it. But I won't let the child pay the price." I didn't know if I was living reality or stuck in some expertly directed movie. Then my mother spoke again. "We're dying, Ethan." I looked up sharply. "Both Marjorie and I have late-stage leukemia. We don't have much time left. We can't take care of Noah for much longer." Felt like a physical blow to my chest. Couldn't breathe. "We're not asking you to be his father out of duty," Mom continued. "We're asking you because this little boy has no one else." I stood frozen. My eyes found Noah, sleeping soundly in Amber's arms, though his lips were pursed as if caught in a troubled dream. I remembered seeing him for the first time in the hospital, the child I hadn't dared to touch. Now, with all the truths laid bare, the biggest question returned. Did I have the courage to do the right thing, even if it wasn't fair? I didn't answer. I walked out of the house, the wind hitting my face as if trying to wipe away everything I just heard. But I knew nothing could truly be erased. It was all there. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I didn't go straight home that evening. I drove aimlessly through the city, no destination, no purpose, just trying to give my mind space to process, if you could still call that freedom. Night air blew through the cracked window, carrying the smell of exhaust and damp asphalt from the afternoon rain. Streetlights swept across the windshield like fragmented memories. The further I drove, the more adrift I felt from any sense of right or wrong. I stopped at a deserted gas station, poured myself a cup of vending machine coffee, weak and bitter, then leaned against the car hood, watching the flickering neon lights reflect on the wet concrete. I thought about my mother and Marjorie, two women I once thought couldn't be more different, now standing on the same side, bound by the same decision, and the same unspoken confession. I remembered the look in my mother's eyes when she said it. We don't have much time left. It wasn't like when she scolded me as a child, nor the encouraging look she gave me as an adult. It was the look of someone with nothing left to lose, except the truth. A few days later, I went back to my mother's house. She opened the door, wearing the same gray sweater I often saw her in during the fall, her hair neatly pinned up, but her hand trembled slightly on the doorknob. I need to talk, I said directly. She wasn't surprised, just stepped aside to let me in. We sat in the living room. No overhead lights, just the warm glow from the table lamp beside the sofa, casting soft yellow light on the pale cream walls. I smelled scented candles, still the lavender she always loved. I began, Mom, have you ever killed someone? The question landed in the quiet room like a stone dropped into a still pond.
No ripples. No hecho.
Just a suffocating weight. Mom looked at me for a long moment. Then she pressed her lips together, exhaling slowly. Do you remember I told you Marjorie and I met in the military? I nodded. Actually, she said, her gaze drifting somewhere far away, we weren't just friends. We were comrades, served together in the Middle East. Back then, there weren't many women in the service, even fewer assigned to combat support roles. But we were chosen because we were cold, rational, quiet, and because nobody thought we'd dare cross certain lines. She paused, took a sip of water from the glass beside her. Once, my unit was ambushed. One of the kids on my team, just 19, was hit bad. I was out of ammo. No way out. Marjorie. She did something no one ever talked about afterward. She took my M16, blocked the enemy's retreat path with her own body, fired round after round, until the barrel glowed red hot. I was silent. Even breathing felt heavy. I thought after the war things would be different. But no. That instinct to sacrifice and to eliminate threats, it was still there. Just the lines between black and white weren't so clear anymore. She turned to look at me, her eyes no longer steely as usual, but soft and weary. When I found out you'd been betrayed, I was furious, but I still chose to stay out of it. I thought, it was your private life. But when I saw Amber using the child to trap you, when I realized you were being forced into a life that wasn't yours, I couldn't stand it. I looked at her for a long time. In that moment, I realized my mother was no longer the woman who always tried to teach me reason. She was now a mother facing death. And everything she did, even the wrong things, stemmed from one fear, that when she was gone, I would have no one standing beside me. I thought, I said slowly, I was being pulled into some crazy story, but now I see. Maybe you've been living in it for a long time. You just wanted me to know now. She nodded, didn't argue. I stood up, walked to the window. Outside, leaves rustled under the streetlights, quiet, as if the whole world was eavesdropping on our conversation. You want me to adopt Noah? I stated, not a question. She stood, came beside me, placed a hand on my shoulder, not pushing, not forcing, just a very real, light touch. Not because he's my grandchild, but because he's a child with no one left. I swallowed hard. A lump formed in my throat. And then what? I asked. You and Marjorie pass away, and I raise him alone? A child who isn't mine by blood? While people could dig up the past anytime, Mom pulled an envelope from her pocket, placed it in my hand. All the paperwork has been handled. This house, my savings, Marjorie's, or it all transfers to you if you agree. You'll have enough to raise him. And if you don't agree, I'll understand. I looked at the envelope, didn't open it. Then I looked into her eyes. I don't need the money, Mom, I said. I just need to know I'm doing the right thing. She smiled faintly, squeezed my hand gently. Right isn't always black and white, Ethan. But if you do it so your heart can be at peace, so a child can have a decent life, then it's right. For the first time in months, I let a tear fall without wiping it away. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not at Mom. Not at Marjorie. Not even at Amber. I just saw a door that had opened. On the other side wasn't paradise. But maybe it was a place I could start over with someone who needed me, and with a part of myself I never knew existed. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not because of nightmares, not from lack of sleep. Simply, I didn't want to hide under the covers anymore. I made coffee, opened the window to let the early sunlight stream in, allowing the scent of pine trees from the yard to drift into the kitchen. On the table lay the envelope Mom had given me yesterday, still unopened. But now it didn't need to be opened. I knew what I was going to do. Around 10 o'clock, I arrived at Marjorie's house. Kelly had called me the night before. Just one sentence. The little guy's been asking about you. The white wooden gate opened with a familiar creak. I saw Kelly sitting on the porch steps, her hair in a high bun, holding a children's book. The boy and Noah sat in her lap, legs dangling slightly, fingers fiddling with the drawstring of his jacket. She looked up at me, didn't say anything, just smiled. The boy looked up too, his eyes wide and curious. Ethan, he exclaimed, then hesitated. I remember you.
I'm Noah.
I sat down next to him, feeling a sting behind my eyes from something so small, yet so real. I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, the feeling of strangeness was gone. Do you want to come play at my house? I asked, my voice slow and soft, as if inviting a small guest into my world. Noah nodded without hesitation. Are there toys there? I chuckled. Not yet, but if you come, I'll buy some. He narrowed his eyes, thinking for a few seconds like a little old man, then nodded firmly. Okay. Kelly placed a hand on my shoulder as I stood up. I'll help you, she said quietly. I thought I didn't want to get attached again, but watching how you faced everything, I find myself wanting to try. I didn't know what to say, just nodded slowly, surely. A week later, the adoption papers were signed. Everything was arranged with surprising speed, likely because Marjorie had prepared it long ago. My mother's old house was transferred to my name. I moved in with Noah. On our first day in the new house, Noah asked me, Ethan, what should I call you? I looked at him for a long moment, then replied, whatever makes you happy. He thought for a moment, then said clearly, can I call you Dad? I turned away quickly, pretending to look for something in a drawer. But really, I was just trying to swallow the tears before they fell in front of him. Of course you can. I managed, my voice thick. Then winter came. Then my mother passed away, quietly, without pain. Marjorie followed a few weeks later. Two women who had gone together, much like they had once stood side by side on distant battlefields. Only this time, they left me a child, a home, and a legacy unlike any earthly possession. Loyalty, even when the cost was conscience itself. Kelly and I grew closer. No rushing, no pressure. Just two people who had been broken, learning to trust the warmth of another hand again. 3 months later, I proposed with my mother's old ring, something I found while cleaning out her bedroom drawer. She didn't say anything, just cried and nodded. The wedding was simple, just a few close friends and family. Noah was the ring bearer. He wore a tiny suit, walking with the serious air of a miniature gentleman. As everyone laughed, he whispered in my ear, "You're not alone anymore, Dad." I hugged him tightly, feeling like I wasn't just holding a child, but holding on to the part of my own heart that had been neglected for so many years. One early spring afternoon, while cleaning out my mother's study, I found an old journal. Brown leather cover, spine peeling. Inside were pages filled with dense handwriting. But not about me. About old missions, decisions that forced her hand, and the long nights she lay awake, haunted by the sacrifices made. Tucked between the pages was an old photograph. My mother and Marjorie, standing in front of a building with small text behind them, George Bush Center for Intelligence, 1999. I chuckled softly. Turns out she was CIA. And never told me. I put the photo back where I found it, closed the journal, and walked out to the living room, where Kelly was peeling an apple for Noah. They both looked up at me, their eyes full of peace. And I knew, for the first time in all those years, I was no longer just a survivor of trauma. I was chosen not by blood, but by love. And sometimes, as my mother had written in her journal, blood only brings us into the world, but it's choice that makes us worthy of being part of someone's life.